Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Claudia Dreifus and Andrew Hacker have written a wonderful book about the colleges we struggle to pay for, and they tell us to look carefully at what we're buying. The book is called Higher Education, with a question mark, How Colleges Are Wasting Our Money and Failing Our Kids, and What We Can Do About It. Claudia Dreifus is my guest today. Hello.
Hello.
Greetings. You're a writer.
Yes.
Yeah, and you're also a teacher at college or at graduate school.
I teach at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs, and I teach foreign correspondence to be. So I'm a writer who professes, and Andrew Hacker is a professor who writes.
Oh, that's a very good combination. So what made you tackle this subject?
Well, we spend a lot of our time in the academy, and we saw things we didn't like. It's a very unexamined part of our society. There are more than 4,000 American colleges. We didn't even look at universities and graduate schools.
So these are undergraduate schools.
Undergraduate, just the first 4 years. And it's a whole segment of society that is very different than the rest of society with completely different rules. But yet, that college education is probably the second biggest purchase a family will make in their lifetimes. It's almost $250,000 at this point in the private colleges. So what's
amazing.
going on there?
Right. It has a, when you said it's separate from everything, it's like a different world. They have a different vocabulary, they have a different aura, different traditions.
And a different economy.
And a different economy.
I think of it something like if you grafted the healthcare system onto the economy of the former Soviet Union. That is what you'd get when you'd look at our colleges and our universities. It doesn't have to turn a profit. It has a, not that we're in favor of for-profit colleges, but because they are often nonprofit charitable organizations, there's very little public supervision. If they make a big disastrous decision, nobody pays.
Right, and nobody really knows.
But tuition goes up.
Right.
And it's gone up way disproportionately to anything else in society.
So the students are paying,
and
or the parents, or whoever's paying the bills.
And the students are
government.
paying through loans. And the assumption has always been that the students will continue to pay through loans through indebtedness, because this is the key to being middle class. Without a university degree, you're not middle class. And till now, it has seemed a worthwhile proposition, but it's not at $250,000.
I was fascinated also by your critique about what basically is college supposed to do.
Well, it's very interesting in our society what it's supposed to do. I think in some societies, let's say in parts of Africa, we take our young people and they take their young people, they take them to a hut, they perform dances and tell stories, and when you're done there, you come out and you're a member of your people. In some ways, our colleges serve the same function. Do they educate people? Do they give young people the knowledge of their people, of the world, of their ancestors, of human endeavors? Well, less and less. I mean, it does everything else but that, it seems, very often. And that's part of what we're critical of.
It takes 2 years or 4 years. And it's the 4 years after high school, at a period of maturation when you're supposed to be maturing, right? And you had in this a critique that, I mean, I got the impression, I always felt that 4 years of college is supposed to make you more aware of how to learn and what to learn and all the exciting things that are there, and to equip you to go ahead and challenge things.
Well, yeah, but learning's the least of what goes on in our colleges now. It's not priority number one. Sports very often will be social behavior. This is what costs the money. The schools are more and more like resorts and less like places and centers of learning.
So the tuition money, or the money, it's called tuition, right?
Well,
it's separate
tuition
from
and
room and board.
Well, tuition and room and board. We have in the book ideas for how just families could do it for a lot cheaper. And the first idea is don't go away to college. You can avoid debt, which we think is the first and primary goal for our young people, by staying at home by going to one of the city colleges, one of the CUNY colleges where Andrew Hacker teaches, my partner. Debt really comes into play once you have that. I was reading the newspaper this morning, the New York Times, where I work on the science desk, and I read something I didn't know, that there's a very low debt level among students in community colleges and very low default rate. Why? And students, well, they're poorer actually in general than the students who go to four-year colleges, but they're living at home.
But they're smarter because they know they don't have the money to spend to do the other things. I mean, I think so much in society, we peg it on where did you go to school? And the expectation is that you go to a certain college, that's going to make you successful in the future. And colleges really pin a lot of their sales on that thing. And you've proved that that's not necessarily true.
There are good and bad teachers in every university and college. And even, let's say, at some of the community colleges, which are not the most prestigious, there are wonderful teachers there, and they really want to teach because they're not necessarily doing research. So you can get a lot of personal attention at a community college, and that may be better than going to a more prestigious private college. There is a physician that both Andrew and I visit, and he has some young women there who are his assistants. And they went to NYU, my alma mater. One of the young women there thought she had a full tuition scholarship. She wanted to be a doctor. She graduated with $70,000 in debt just from those little add-ons. I asked her to explain to me how you get $70,000 in debt. At the end of our conversation, what she said to me that was so startling was, she said, I wish I had gone to Stony Brook like the other kids I went to high school with. I wouldn't have any debt now. She may never go to medical school because of that $70,000.
She has to work to pay it all.
Yeah, and think of it, 22 years old with a $70,000 debt, and it's not unusual.
So what we're really saying is that there are colleges that are not worth the cost.
I think any debt is not worth the cost. It's a terrible way to get started in life. It closes off your options. I was so impressed by the students I met from Cooper Union, an all-scholarship school.
Oh, well, yeah.
Yeah.
But doesn't that would lead to something not really good either, because it would mean only those who have a lot of money can go to some of these other schools, and it further separates that network that they supposedly form when they go to these colleges.
We believe that a school like Harvard, even though they've lost a huge part of their endowment through unwise and ridiculous speculation, we believe they could be, if they really wanted to be, a true meritocracy, they could use that enormous endowment to be like Cooper Union.
Right.
If they really wanted to be, we are really the best and the brightest.
Or if they adopted some of the other suggestions you make in this book, because what's interesting to me is the basic assumption is go to a school that has a very good reputation. That's in a lot of homes.
We say get a good schooling.
You're saying get good schooling.
And no debt.
But people say go to a school with a good reputation. So if you have to borrow, you borrow, but go to this school because you're going to get professors that are terrific and you're going to get a degree that's valuable. And in this book, you prove that's not true.
It happens that at the elite colleges with the brand names, the professors very often don't even teach, or don't teach the undergraduates. The whole goal at a Harvard, a Yale, a Princeton is to be a star professor who teaches as little as possible. So you have in the history department this year at Harvard, something like 40% of the full professors not there. If you think you're going there to study with one of those, you better catch them. I know of a professor at Harvard whose son went to Harvard, and the son could not find one single person to write a recommendation to graduate school because he had no relationship with his professors. Now, that doesn't happen at the city universities.
This is what shows us that most colleges are the world separate from us, and that they've created. I mean, it's almost as if the system is so old that it's now rotting. It's over maturing. I mean, the colleges, I don't. I wanted to. It's so hard to grasp exactly where you start, but
yeah, it's a big system, and it's like healthcare. Where do you start looking at it?
And it's also like in politics, you know, all these wealthy business people, they're supposed to be so smart, unlike the political people or the government workers, they're much smarter, and they're not. So the question, the thing was always, if they're rich, they must be smart. Or the hedge fund operators who make all this money.
Or if you're a professor at an Ivy League college, you must be.
That's in the same thing. You must be smart, and the college must be great. Now,
but I have to say, as I teach at Columbia, Columbia is very good, particularly the School of International Affairs.
Well, is that a graduate
It's a graduate school.
Yeah, but
I love my students.
Yes,
and I love that school.
Are they borrowing money to go?
On the whole, not. Some are, but these are international students, and it's a mixture of international and domestic students.
Right.
But it is a very sophisticated place. It's a very open place. And so when I'm denouncing the Ivy League, I should sort of put this disclaimer. But I really teach them because I love it.
Well, I'm sure there are some wonderful programs in all of these schools that we're condemning, but the schools have, when you said they could use their endowment, but there are other things they can do because schools have become such large institutions. They're always growing.
Growing for its own sake.
So the tuition goes to pay for the plant, the development that they do.
And there's huge growth in bureaucracies at the universities. There's not so much a growth in paying professors. I mean, there's been this huge growth in using adjuncts who are paid maybe a sixth what a regular professor is paid, so that
the adjuncts are not on the tenure track.
They're not even on the getting paid prorated. Even if you paid adjuncts a prorated amount of what you're paying the regular tenured people, it would be fairer. Yeah. But 1/6, and I have to say the City University does something similar.
Yeah, but then they pay for, like you mentioned Kenyon College with its enormous sports facility. I have a grandson who's a swimmer, and he really was talking about how he'd like to go there because
they have
how much money did they spend for that?
I think it would. I don't have the figure, but it's either 45 or 65 million.
And that money gets absorbed into tuition, either by paying the on the loan, paying the interest on the loan, or by just plain tuition.
Then they have to hire lots of coaches.
Right.
And so you look at a school like Williams, I believe they have something like 75 coaches. And
you also said 70%, I think, of the employees are non-teaching people.
Absolutely.
Is that the college's effort to be politically correct?
Well, some of it is mandated by the federal government, but there is the sense in the private colleges that there's nothing that they shouldn't do for the students, so that every aspect of their lives are micromanaged. I had my students do a profile last year at Columbia, and they said, who do we profile? So I said, well, look around the school and find somebody to profile. Well, one of my students came back with an office of the smoking czar, the who knew there was a whole office dedicated to not smoking?
So that's the salary?
And a secretary and
the
a
equipment
building
and the space and everything else.
Everything is
plus the sports. So is it the University of Tennessee that pays $5 million to its football coach?
I believe
one of them.
Like but it's not uncommon.
$5 million to a football coach. Why is football so important to a college education?
We say Andrew Hacker and I say in higher education that we have to get back to the core value of teaching our kids. That should be number one. Everything else that happens on a campus should be justified.
And that would in turn lower tuition to make it more affordable for everybody.
Stop doing all these things that cost money other than teach.
So the other part of that costs money are the professors who are supposed to teach, who basically are not teaching because they're tenured, which is a lifetime guarantee that they have this job. Right?
Well, it's not just that they're tenured.
Well,
it's that the center
has to go into it.
Yeah, it's that the center of higher education at this point in our country has become research and not teaching. Teaching is not what's prestigious. Research is how you get promoted. And a lot of things that you and I might not consider research are considered research.
So stop for a minute. In order to be considered for tenure, the person, the teacher, feels they have to do research and publish something, right? That is a strong requirement to get tenure.
It's an absolute requirement.
So that's what starts
you
the
have
research.
You have to publish 2 books, probably, endless articles. You have to go to conventions. Conventions are considered a publication. It's not unusual for academics to have 40-page CVs. It is unusual for, and it all has to be original, so you end up with 3,000 papers on Virginia Woolf, 3,000 papers on Moby Dick, 3,000 papers on Faulkner, who I love, but I cannot think of 3,000 new things that could be said about Faulkner.
Right. So that is what's driving the part of, a very important part of what's driving the reputation, the scope, and the money, right?
Yes, and
not only that, they get sabbaticals, they get full years.
In public colleges, once every 7 years, in private college, once every 3. And Andrew Hacker and I were talking, my writing partner, this morning, and I asked him, how many sabbaticals have you taken in the 55 years you've taught? And he said, 2, and quite a long time ago. He has never written a book on sabbatical, as far as I know. And we wrote this book, our own book, without
taking any time
off. I feel that a lot of books could be written on their own because the only reason to write a book really is because you're burning to have something to say, not because you want to get promoted.
Right.
And there could be a lot less publications. Now, when we say that, we're accused of being anti-intellectual and opposing knowledge, and that's just not the case. We're not against mapping the genome, and we're not against the polio vaccine, but we are against 3,000 papers on Virginia Woolf. We don't need it. I'm sorry. Even the NIH makes some judgments about what they're going to fund and what's necessary and what isn't. And in the social sciences and in the humanities, we need to begin to make some judgments too. Some things are unnecessary.
So we need a revolution.
We need to look at this part of our society, and consumers, parents and students and grandparents, a lot of grandparents are paying for this, need to start asking the same kind of questions that we ask about the healthcare system. Ronnie, you remember 30 years ago, people didn't go and question their hospital bills.
Right.
They didn't question their doctors.
I was going to say they didn't question their doctors. So we're in a process of knocking down myths in a way.
Well, we need to become better consumers, and that's what we hope our book is part of. It's amazing to us that people haven't asked questions about an institution that's so much a part of our society and our lives that we send our children to.
It's such an interesting question in a general cultural way, because the more we demystify a lot of these different things, the less respect we then have for it. And then what happens generally, and I'm not in favor of all these mystiques and these separate vocabularies and categories that you think you'd never be able to attain or understand, but it is all around us, isn't it, when you mention it? Doctors, lawyers, certainly politicians now with the whole general aura of don't believe anybody or something.
But question. There's a difference between don't believe anybody and question.
Yeah.
I think the fact that we haven't questioned this part of society has given them a blank check. The feeling is families will always pay. Much of it, there's much that goes on there that's wonderful, and there's stuff that's wrong. And we need to look at it.
And we need to reorganize then.
Yeah.
You're saying it isn't necessary for a college to be part of a university that has a medical school.
Well,
How do
it
you do
depends. But medical schools really dominate the schools that they're part of. So we suggest that in some situations it would be better if the schools spun off their medical schools and their research facilities, because the resources wouldn't be tapped by that. They would be separate. I would not like to read any university's financial statements. I'd rather read an Enron balance sheet than try to figure that out. But part of the reason that the financing is so indecipherable and so untransparent is because you can fudge money and put money into different kinds of functions. That's particularly true where there are graduate schools and where there are medical centers. That's why in the book we only looked at schools that were 4-year because we couldn't even take that on.
The schools that you selected as 10 examples of what you're talking
Off
about.
the map.
Were fascinating. They
Yeah.
were. One was Ramapo, which is a 2-year college in New Jersey.
Raritan.
Raritan, I'm sorry.
A community college that the biggest feature of the school is a parking lot. But you go there, the classes are small, the teachers care, and you can go to Rutgers when you're done. Big thing, it's cheap. We think cheap is good.
Yeah.
Now, we don't think cheap, bad is good, but I think you can get individualized and very personal attention.
Ole Miss.
Ole Miss. I was surprised by Ole Miss. I went to Ole Miss about 2 years ago, actually to see a football game, which I'd never seen in my life. And for people of my generation, Ole Miss is the symbol of a university that was the heart of racism.
Right.
It is a very changed place. There's a statue to James Meredith there.
He was the first African American to go there.
And people died integrating that place for him to be able to go to school. There were deaths. That's how tied to the Old South Ole Miss was. The students are wonderful, engaged. It's somewhat, parts of it are still a party school, but they have an honors college that is wonderful. And there's a lot of racial reconciliation there. I even sort of enjoyed the football game in an interesting way, but I'm still against having football be the center of college life.
Right. What were some of the other schools? Evergreen?
Evergreen is one of the only liberal arts schools in the country that's a state school, and it's very progressive, no grades, low faculty salaries, no tenure, but there's a real teaching comes first attitude there, and the professors attend each other's class because they're interested. I hadn't seen that before.
So how do we start to do this? People, the consumer should say, you're charging too much money.
For starters. And I think the consumers should stop being so status conscious themselves. When you're going on that family tour to look at your child or grandchild's college, take a look and see if what they're selling is facilities and plants, and if the place looks like a hotel and not a college. If they're selling too much fun, go away. It's not supposed to be a resort.
Go on.
An editor I was working with was telling me about the tour she took with her son. It was like a culinary tour of Napa, except she was going to all these 4-year schools in New England. I'd say if the food looks too good, go away.
Go away. So object. Don't steer your kids to other schools, but also just boycott almost in a way. I mean, somehow it has to be known to these schools they're going to have to cut their expenditures.
Yes, and
right.
At this point they feel parents will pay anything.
Right.
And for the elite schools, they could probably charge twice what they do because people want that label.
So bad.
And we have to stop saying, we don't want the label, we want good teaching. Let me just throw one analogy at you. You know those Louis Vuitton pocketbooks?
Right, and all the knockoffs, huh?
Yeah, but all they are is brown plastic, brown linoleum.
Right.
All it does is say, I can afford to spend $1,000 on brown plastic. That, to me, is Yale.
That's so good. It's so good. Now, let's just go. Who's going to start the opposition to tenure? How is that going to happen?
Well, that's a tough one, because tenure is very much associated in people's minds with a free inquiry and liberty. We say it's a benefit. It's an economic benefit. It's not about...
Doesn't it have to come from the younger teachers who are having harder and harder times achieving tenure and want to teach?
Well, actually, they don't necessarily want to teach. They want to get tenure. And we say that we've seen too many instances where the younger faculty actually suppress what they think in order to get tenure. It's like joining a fraternity.
Right.
Or a sorority.
Conformity, don't complain, don't antagonize, doing anything.
In science, it's deadly. I mean, several young scientists have told me that they have heard senior professors say things that were patently wrong, and they were afraid to contradict them. So we think there are other ways to protect liberty and freedom of speech, and that people have got to start asking, maybe there are other ways to do this, maybe 3-year contracts, maybe 5-year contracts, maybe 10-year contracts. A lot of schools don't have tenure, a few anyway.
Are there more and more happening? Do we know of any schools that have dropped the tenure?
Well, there's newer schools that haven't done it, like Hampshire and Evergreen. And the Spanish Inquisition has not come there. So I even know of some people who've said to me, you know, I found it really useful being reviewed after 3 years because I was asked, what are my goals for the next 3 years? And I had to think about that. All of us who work have to deal with capricious employers sometimes, and we deal with it. I work in a field where, and I work in an office at 1 day a week at the Times, where everybody's very alpha. I mean, everybody was class valedictorian. People are smart, but we work together for a common purpose. You don't see that a lot on campus, and part of that, I think, is because of tenure.
And the individuality and your
Very
reputation
individualistic.
And your stuff. Yeah.
It's my career, it's my resume, it's putting myself
But
forward.
they always say that college, university politics are the worst.
The worst, and it's absolutely true.
Well, let's tell that to all the politicians. I hate to tell you this, but we've come to the end of this interview.
This is fun.
So thank you, Claudia. And people should read this book because it's not only so interesting, it's read so well that it's almost like you can't wait to see what's next chapter.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.